Kentucky Derby future wager pool number 2, odds and analysis for pool number 2. And of course, starting the road to the 2023 Kentucky Derby, we are going to talk about the 38 individual horses, kind of get you up to date on the Kentucky Derby trail, as normally Thanksgiving weekend and Kentucky Derby future wager for this pool. You also have a chance to bet into the sire pool. We're going to go over some of the first day betting trends. Not a lot of money in the pool. And of course, the field is currently favored at 4-5. And a couple of sons of Into Mischief taking a lot of the play early on. We're going to talk about those two. We've got Extra Anejo and Giant Mischief, both under 20-1 in the odds. But if you have a question, make sure to get that in as we get ready to take a look at Kentucky Derby future wager pool number 2, starting off with basically the pool is going to run today. It opened up and it's going to run through Sunday. And of course, this is pool number 2. January will be pool number 3. And the new pool this year was the Breeders' Cup week. That officially was pool number 1. And in the past, this has been pool number 1. And the big news this year is that they also have 40 horses. So now you can bet on 38 individual horses. They have an all other fillies, and then they have an all other colts. So lots of options here. Really spices up some of those exactas. And we had over 10 horses in pool number 1 end up at over 100-1 odds. So Kentucky Derby future wager pool number 2, the windows are now open through Sunday. And the first announcement that the wagering on Frank's honor, he has been injured and as of right now is off the Kentucky Derby trail. So that is one less horse to be betting on in Kentucky Derby future wager pool number 2. Now let's take a look at some of the horses on the morning line, starting off with Forte at 10-1. And then you've got Extra Anejo at 15-1, Giant Mischief at 25-1, Blazing Sevens at 30-1, and Loggins at 40-1. Those were the 5 lowest odds coming into the day. And so far, that's pretty much the way the betting is holding up. You've got Forte right around 11-1. You've got Extra Anejo right there at 11-12-1. Giant Mischief down to 16-1 on the bettings, and Loggins right around 20-25-1. I think that's where you're going to end up sitting with Loggins in Kentucky Derby future wager. And that's kind of the morning line. And the early betting, of course, is going to be on Forte, most likely going to win the Juvenile Championship for 2022. Of course, that'll be announced, the Eclipse Awards, in January. But Forte, a 3-time Grade 1 winner, closed out the year with wins in the Hopeful on the slop. Then he went to Keeneland and won the Futurity coming off the pace, out-dueling Loggins in a stretch drive of that race, and then winning the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. He ran down the even money favorite in Cave Rock that day. And of course, Forte, by violence, trained by Todd Pletcher. He's won a couple of Kentucky Derbies, Super Saver in the slop, and then he also won with Always Dreaming, winning in the slop. Of course, Todd Pletcher, the all-time Kentucky Derby trainer in terms of number of starters. D. Wayne Lucas right up there as well. Those are the top 2. So Todd Pletcher going to be probably bringing at least another one to the Derby in 2023. And right now that looks like it could be Forte. And the key thing with Forte, I think if you're playing him in futures, I don't really recommend playing him here in pool number 2. I'll tell you why. One of the reasons is that he's currently right around 11-12-1. But with his 5 starts as a juvenile, he won a maiden race. Then he also ran the 3 Grade 1s, but he also ran 4th in the Sanford Stakes. He's got 5 starts and he's got plenty of points. The Breeders' Cup Juvenile was made a 30-point race in 2022. So that means Forte has plenty of points. And I think he's only going to run twice before the Kentucky Derby as a 3-year-old. So that means he's probably going to have a 2 prep campaign which means you might not see him until Fountain of Youth. Now, Todd Pletcher usually goes a couple of ways with his best horse out of Florida, that's where he's based in the wintertime. He usually brings his best horse to Florida Derby, and then he also has used the Keeneland Bluegrass race, and that's now a grade 1. But the connections of Forte, there's a lot of connections to New York. So there's a chance that Forte may go in the Wood Memorial. Of course, a couple of years ago, he won the Wood Memorial with a big long shot, Bourbonic, at 72-1, closing out of the clouds there. But he also had Dynamic One in that Wood Memorial. So Forte probably only 2 preps. But the main thing is so I think his odds may go up as more of these horses race. They're going to start getting bigger reputations. And I think you'll get 10 or 11-1 in pool 3 or pool 4 on Forte. So I don't recommend betting Forte in pool number 2. Now, Forte, of course, with that 5-start campaign, most likely I'm predicting a 2-start prep campaign for 2023. And Forte by violence out of a Blame mare. And of course, it was Blame at Churchill Downs, giving Zenyatta the only loss of her career. Now let's take a look at some of the horses in pool number 2. We're going to sort them here by odds. Forte, we've already talked about. Extra Anejo. Now this horse was bet down in Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 1. He's by Into Mischief. He's out of a hard spun mare, and the owner of Gunrunner, Winchell Thoroughbreds, they own Extra Anejo. They paid $1.3 million at the Keeneland September yearling sale in 2021. Of course, he's a 2-year-old now, and some European influence once you get 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generation back, but a lot of dirt pedigree in the broodmare sire with hard spun. Of course, he ran in the Kentucky Derby, set the pace the year that Carl Nafsker won the Kentucky Derby. And of course, Into Mischief, he already has a Derby winner with Authentic. So Extra Anejo right around 12-1. Now, there was talk that he was going to run in the Kentucky Jockey Club on Saturday, but they are going to wait. He did work out on November 6th. He worked out on November 15th, and looks like they're going to point for the December 26th Gunrunner Stakes. That is at the fairgrounds, and it is the route that Epicenter went in 2021 when he went to the Kentucky Derby as the favorite. Of course, Steve Asmussen still winless in the Kentucky Derby. He's had 16, 17 starters now, and Extra Anejo is most likely going to be the 2nd or 3rd favorite at worst here in pool number 2, but most likely the 2nd favorite. Again, he's going to run on December 26th. If he wins that race, he's probably going to face a 5-6 horse field in that Gunrunner Stakes. So Extra Anejo, if he goes off 12-13-1, you may want to consider a few exactas with a horse like that if you think he could just speed away and really win that Gunrunner Stakes, which is 10 points, 10-4-3-2-1 on the Kentucky Derby point scale. Another horse that's going to get a lot of play is a son of Into Mischief, Giant Mischief. Now, a lot of people may remember him winning on the Breeders' Cup weekend. He came in from Indiana. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but he was 6-1 that day, outdueled Arabian Lion, the big Bob Baffert favorite in that race, and he is going to point for either the Smarty Jones at Oaklawn Park or possibly the Springboard Mile at Remington Park on December 17th in a couple of weeks. Now, the upcoming Derby prep season does include the Remsen Stakes next Saturday on December 3rd. We've got the Kentucky Jockey Club this Saturday on Future Stars Friday number 2 at Churchill Downs. And then you go to Remington, Los Alamitos for the Los Al Futurity on December the 10th. There's a chance we may see Arabian Night or Arabian Lion in that race. And then on December 17th is the Springboard Mile. Those are all points races on the 2022 Kentucky Derby Trail. And remember, we're going to be previewing those races. We do have a preview up of the Kentucky Jockey Club. So some big races coming up for Giant Mischief. Brad Cox trains, a chance to see where he wants to get underway. He's 2 for 2, he waits till the Smarty Jones, that would give him a two-start campaign, and then probably 3 starts as a 3-year-old getting ready for the Derby Trail. Then you've got Blazing Sevens. He ran an even 4th in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, trained by Chad Brown. Of course, he won the Grade 1 Champagne Stakes. He's by Curlin. Should get a little bit better as a 3-year-old. He's got a solid foundation under him. And then a lot of talk right now. Loggins right around 22-1. He's trained by Brad Cox. He's by Ghost Zapper. A 9-length win in his maiden victory, and then came back and dueled the length of the stretch against Forte in the Keeneland Futurity. He lost on a head bob. And the talk right now is that Loggins is going to go to the fairgrounds. I think what we're going to see is most likely we're going to see the Gunrunner Stakes with the heavy favorite going to be Extra Anejo. And then we'll probably have Loggins wait until the Lecomte Stakes. And then if Extra Anejo wins the Gunrunner, he'll point to the Risen Star. And then we'll see where Brad Cox goes. Of course, he's ran horses last year at the fairgrounds. Then he brought up Cyberknife to win the Arkansas Derby after getting an allowance win at the fairgrounds. So Brad Cox and Steve Asmussen both like to use Oaklawn and fairgrounds to base their top 3-year-olds out of that barn in their 3-year-old winter campaign. Now you've got Echo again. A lot of people remember his Saratoga maiden victory, bet down that day, drew off to the big win. Of course, Echo again, then was entered at 1-5, 2-5 in a second start, faded off the screen. You know, I think the way he kind of just backed out in that race, he may have bled in that race. He was entered again, but that race was declared a non-start when they declared that race a non-official race. So we'll see where Echo again shows up. He might be going to the fairgrounds or Oaklawn as well. I think that's where Steve Asmussen, he trains both Echo again and Extra Anejo. We'll see where he's going to point one or the other. I think he's not going to want to double dip with 2 horses of those good quality. Signator is an interesting horse. He's owned by West Point Thoroughbreds. He's by Tappet. Tappet with all the Belmont Stakes winners, but he has never won a Kentucky Derby win. So we'll see where Signator goes. But he did get a nice win in his second lifetime start. Lots of options are on the table for Signator. And then you've got 10 Days Later and Gulfport rounding out some of the other horses at lower odds. Gulfport, of course, another one trained by Steve Asmussen. But, you know, we might have already seen he's had a big campaign, kind of regressed at the tail end of his juvenile campaign. We might only see him with 2 starts as a 3-year-old before the Derby. Not sure he wants 10 furlongs. He's not the type of horse that I like to bet here in future wager number 2. I'm looking for more of the lightly raced horses, some of the horses only with 1 or 2 races that could maybe jump up in their next start and go down in odds. So I think Gulfport, I question his ability to get the 10 furlongs of the Kentucky Derby. I do think he overall is a nice horse. And again, we've seen those horses, you know, one of the things we're trying to do is kind of get a beat in on all of these Triple Crown horses because you've got all the minor derbies, you got the West Virginia Derby, you've got the Woody Stevens, you got the Pat Day Mile, you go to the Preakness, and then you've got all the summer derbies like the Iowa Derby, the Jim Dandy, the Travers. So lots of horses that maybe they can't handle grade 1 competition, but they can take on some of those minor derbies. And I think that's where you might eventually see a horse like Gulfport. First question of the night we've got from Siggy Mendoza, obscure pedigree aficionado. You can follow him on Twitter at Siggy Mendoza. He says he surprised Victory Formation running in a 6 furlong race this weekend. Yes, Victory Formation came out with a big victory in his debut, and he's another one that I think he was listed in pool number 1. He's also listed in pool number 2. They opted not to run in the Kentucky Jockey Club Juvenile. You know, one of the things we saw last year, you know, in the past, a lot of times the horses would get that second sprint under their belt as kind of that second foundation race. If you notice, the Breeders' Cup Kentucky Derby season prep races by Churchill Downs, all of them are 2 turns or a mile or longer. And there isn't really a lot of races as a 3-year-old. They're all mile and a 16th, mile and an 1/8 races. So Siggy, I think what they're doing here is, we used to see the San Vicente be kind of that 7-furlong prep. I think what they're going to do here in this race is see what Hit Show can do. If he picks up a nice win, or even if he just runs a strong race, he's got 2 races under his belt. He doesn't have to go into the stakes races. Not a lot of points. That Kentucky Jockey Club, just 10, 4, 3, 2, 1. So you really don't need the points at this point. So I think that's why Siggy doesn't really need the points, and he gets that second race to get a little bit of conditioning. So that's a good question. Another horse that was trained by Steve Asmussen is Disarm. He's 80-1. He's by Gunrunner. He ran a race at Saratoga, got his maiden victory. A little bit got injured out of that race. He is listed here in pool number 2. Be interesting to see where he shows up. Steve Asmussen, he's not afraid to double dip, but he may have to use the Bluegrass or even the Wood Memorial to separate his final contenders. Another thing is Steve Asmussen has roots down south, so he's not afraid. He's brought horses to the Sunland Derby if that's a route he wants to go with one of his 3-year-olds next spring. He has done that in the past, so that's an option always for Bob Baffert and Steve Asmussen. They have always used that Sunland Derby as a chance to get some points and get on the Kentucky Derby starting gate. Instant Coffee is a horse that's going to be running Saturday, Kentucky Jockey Club. Now, that horse, the thing with Instant Coffee is he is taking a little bit of a drop in class. He comes out of the Keeneland Futurity. I think that Keeneland Futurity was probably the strongest run juvenile race of the 2-year-old prep season. I just like the way Loggins and both Forte ran in that race, the way they were bet in that race. And then Forte came back and validated that with the Breeders' Cup Juvenile win over Cave Rock. And then Loggins backed up that big maiden special weight win and stretched out in the Keeneland Futurity. Brad Cox did not want to give him 3 races as a 2-year-old, so he's going to wait till early January, probably the Lecomte Stakes for Loggins. Now, we've got another horse, Bromley, another winner. Capture the Flag. A lot of people may not remember this horse. Picked up a win first time out, a homebred, trained by Shug McGahee. Of course, a long time ago, Kentucky Derby, he brought Easy Goer on the trail. Then he won the Kentucky Derby with Orb, first year of the point system. So that'll be nice to see possibility of getting Shug McGahee back on the trail. Capture the Flag. Joseph Allen, the owner. Looks like Tabor has bought in a little bit of an interest after that big maiden win. The only question there is that was a 5-horse field and a little bit of a turf pedigree. And a lot of times, especially on that female side, but Quality Road is the sire here. So Capture the Flag most likely going to be 100-1 in this pool. Derby Bandit not joining us live tonight, but he'll be joining us in the future on another live stream. He's wishing everybody a happy Thanksgiving. He is reveling in his Houston Astros, and now he says he's going to double down, him and Mattress Mac, putting it all on the Dallas Cowboys to win the Super Bowl. That is Derby Bandit checking in. He made my graphic here. If you noticed the graphic in the corner, that was made by the infamous Derby Bandit. He says tomorrow he is going to be betting the Clark Handicap, and Derby Bandit going to be playing the Churchill Downs card tomorrow and getting his action in. Any other questions? Make sure to get them in here to the studio as we take your questions tonight. Going over some of the other information for this pool, we've got Cyclone Mischief, Dale Romans. Of course, he likes to get on that Derby trail. He's got Cyclone Mischief running on Saturday in the Kentucky Jockey Club. He's going to be one of the 3 favorites in that race. Expect more. This horse is a maiden, entered, listed in pool number 2, will probably be 150-1. You might want to consider this horse. He ran against Arabian Night, who is 10-1 in Las Vegas. He's not listed in pool number 2 because he's trained by Bob Baffert. None of the Bob Baffert horses are eligible to be listed here in this pool by Churchill Downs. So he will have to switch trainers, just like he did this year with Messier. We'll see what he does. Probably wait again till after the 100, right before the 100-point races, and see where those horses end up. But again, normally Bob Baffert doesn't like to run the horse in the Kentucky Derby. Last year, he had Taba with only 2 lifetime starts, the Curse of Leonidas, less than 3 starts. And then, of course, he had Messier. Messier came back on Breeders' Cup weekend, bled in that race, and ended up losing. So we'll see if Messier ends up in that Malibu Stakes, along with Taba possibility at the end of December, opening day of Santa Anita. So other horses to consider, you've got Litigate, Todd Pletcher. Joseph Saffey has a horse here. Mr. Ripple, you might not know him. He won at Gulfstream Park. He won by 9 lengths in his debut. He's been working steadily, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him in one of those early 3-year-old prep races at Gulfstream, and then possibility of him going to either the Fountain of Youth or the Holy Bull. Mr. Ripple with an impressive maiden victory. I watched that race. I thought it was nice. Pedigree is solid. And of course, Joseph Saffey has been on the Derby trail now. Of course, won the Parks Pennsylvania Derby a few years ago with a long shot. Then you've got Practical Move from out west, a son of Practical Joke. Tappett's Conquest, another one for Brad Cox, a nice maiden win, second time out. And then a horse we may see next week in the Remsen Stakes is Tuskegee Airman, John Service, Cash is King. Yes, Saffey Joseph. I always read it backwards, just like we've got it in the daily racing form. But yeah, Saffey Joseph with Mr. Ripple. That son of Dialed In. Dialed In has had some nice distance horses over the years. He's had Gunnevera, had a couple of other horses, doesn't get a high stallion fee. Darby Dan doesn't give out, they don't like to give out breed to a lot of mares with some of their stallions. So Dialed In, for the price, and he can get you a solid mile and 1/8 type horse. And I wouldn't be surprised to see Mr. Ripple on the trail. Tuskegee Airman, again, could be running in the Remsen Stakes next week on at the Big A Aqueduct. Of course, we got the Demoiselle and the Cigar Handicap as part of that big race card. So Bob Baffert, of course, suspended. He's going to have to move his horses before the Kentucky Derby. He usually lets them kind of see where they stand and then decide what he wants to do. Of course, he's got Fort Warren, maiden special weight winner, Fort Bragg, another one that picked up a nice win. Arabian Lion, who lost to Giant Mischief as a heavy favorite on Breeders' Cup weekend. And then the talk of the Breeders' Cup weekend was Arabian Night. He's 10-1 in Las Vegas to win the Kentucky Derby. He's not listed as an individual horse in Kentucky Derby Future Wager Pool number 2. You'd have to bet him as part of the field, and you would get all of the Bob Baffert horses plus the rest of the horses, Triple Crown nominated. You've got Cave Rock, second in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, I think, with 4 starts with Cave Rock. We'll probably only see a 2-race campaign for him, and most likely the Santa Anita Derby as his final prep before the Kentucky Derby. And the National Treasure, who ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile, ran in the American Pharoah Stakes. But National Treasure, another one I think with a pedigree to possibly improve as a 3-year-old. So Bob Baffert, those are some of his bigger named winners right now, but he's got some other ones that are working out well. He's got a couple of runners entered this weekend at out west. So we'll see how he does with some of those maidens here through the fall. And then he's not afraid to go straight from those maiden special weight races right straight to the stakes races. And a lot of times, a lot of these trainers, they don't really have a lot of options. So those are some of the Bob Baffert contenders that you may want to think about if you're betting that field at 4-5 in pool number 2. Now, other horses, want to talk about some of the horses that have one start, impressive victories that may be bet down a little bit here in pool number 2. You've got Bromley, winner first time out, Capture the Flag. We talked about him for Shug McGahee, Quality Road, Extra Anejo for Steve Asmussen. He's already 11-1 in pool number 2. Expect More for Todd Pletcher, ran third to Arabian Night at Churchill Down at Keeneland. And then Mr. Ripple, the Saffey Joseph horse that picked up a win in his debut. He's been working out. We might see him, who knows, a possibility, some of those early Florida races as a 3-year-old, but I definitely think one that will be pointed for some of the bigger races. Those are the horses with one start. Anybody that you have your eye on that you saw win first out, either from this list, you've got Arabian Night, who won for Bob Baffert, and you've got a few other Chad Brown horses and some other horses at the Big A that have won first out. Corona Bolt won last week at Churchill Downs for Brad Cox. He's from the first crop of Bolt d'Oro. Bolt d'Oro, one of the leading sires of juveniles. Of course, his first crop will be turning 3 next year, but so far the Bolt d'Oros have come out running. What I liked about Corona Bolt is he didn't take the lead out of the gate. He came from 3rd place, made a nice move on the turn, and also then pulled away to victory. Don't forget, every Tuesday we do the speed figure report. We update the fastest speed figures of the week. We highlight some of the maiden winners and some of the horses that may be pointing to that Kentucky Derby trail. If you go to the channel, we've got 3 speed updates already: November 10th, November 15th, and November 22nd. We got one up on Tuesday. And so lots of horses with one start and a chance to, I think really improve in their next start. And then, once they get that second win, they're usually under 20 or 30 to 1 in the Kentucky Derby future wager pool. So the time is now if you want to bet on one of those horses and possibly get 50, 60, 70 to 1 on some of those horses. A question about the Clark handicap tomorrow. Do we got Rich Strike? Can he run a huge race tomorrow? Well, I think he's gonna. It's only a 9-horse field. I think he fits. He's a Grade 1 winner at Kentucky Derby. He ran evenly in the Travers Stakes. He won another race at Churchill Downs. He got a second at Churchill Downs in the Lucas Classic to Hot Rod Charlie. The thing is with Rich Strike, he's got to face Proxy, who I think is going to run a good race. And then you've got West Willpower on the outside, the 7-horse. But West Willpower is in good form, and he has the speed. So I think he's going to run a good race, but I'm not sure that, Proxy is going to be tough. So my opinion is I wouldn't take too low of a price. If you're getting 5 to 2, 2 to 1, I think that's good for Rich Strike. If you're getting like 6 to 5 or 7 to 5, I think I'd rather play a different type of horse in a daily double or an exacta. But that's just me. If you think 7 to 5, 6 to 5 is fair price, that's good. But I would want at least 2 to 1 on Rich Strike tomorrow, 2 wins, and then of course a second in the Lucas Classic. Derby Bandit says he's going to take his chances with Trademark and Last Samurai. Last Samurai for the coach, Dwayne Lucas, trying to get some magic back under the Twin Spires. Trademark had a big win the last out at Keeneland, 23 to 1. He set the pace as a 3-year-old down at Tampa Bay in a couple of those races. I do think Trademark actually has got a little bit of a shot here. He was kind of my long shot. I do have a preview up with the Clark handicap, the Kentucky Jockey Club, and the Golden Rod if you want to watch those races. Don't forget, support the channel. Hit the thanks button. Any donations are welcome. And then also share these videos with your horse racing friends, and also smash that like button, leave a comment so Google knows that you're interested in more horse racing videos. Next up on the topic here, we are going to talk about the speed figure improvement. So a lot of times people they handicap younger horses the same way they handicap older horses with speed figures. And I want to highlight, until a horse has 3 or 4 starts, they can improve dramatically in start number 2 or start number 3. And I kind of want to show you an example of this in Giant Mischief. So Giant Mischief, he is about 17 to 1 in pool number 2. Again, he's going to run in either the Smarty Jones or the race Springboard Mile. But look at his speed figure. He went from a 70 on the Brisnet scale to a 99 in a second lifetime start. And that's how much these horses can improve just because they're lightly raced. And his Beyer speed figure also went from like a 73 to a 95. So that's a 20-point jump. And what happens is with older horses, they don't improve like that. So that's why you can see some of these horses improve by 10, 12, 15 points in their second or third start. So that's the difference between when you look at some of these horses with one race and you see an 80 speed figure or a 78 speed figure, they can improve dramatically in that next start. So another one is lightly raced horses can improve dramatically. You've got Dennington is another example. He went from Ellis Park, picked up a 66 and then an 80. Then all of a sudden he goes to Churchill, wins a big maiden race, and they give him a 90. So, the speed figures aren't as reliable in the lightly raced horses and at the shorter distances until they have other horses to match them up. And the reason why that is a lot of these guys project the speed figures for some of these horses. And if they don't have a lot of information to go with, second, 2, 3, 4 starts, they kind of have to project a speed figure on the lightly raced horses. Another question we've got on the Clark: what fractions do you believe Rich Strike needs in front of him in order to come up for the win? Well, based on normal speed figures and speed fractions, if they were to run a mile and an eighth, I think they're going to do it right about 149 and 3. So if they run right around 149 and 3 to 150, if it's a normal track, I would say he needs faster than he needs 112. So 112.3, 112.2, 112.1. If you give West Willpower or Proxy a 113, they are going to be gone. They're just, Rich Strike can't make a move into that. I'll even take my chances with Trademark in a race like that if the fractions are too slow. So yeah, that's a good question on the Clark handicap. Of course, that always the day after Thanksgiving. That's part of a big card tomorrow. And then Superstars of Tomorrow 2 on Saturday at Churchill Downs. Previews up with the Goldenrod and the Kentucky Jockey Club. So look for speed horses that can improve their speed figure in their second and third start when you look at these past performances for some of these lightly raced horses. Now, one of the things that I always do when a horse runs is look at their debut date and then their second start, because that's where you can see that improvement. And here's an example of some of the horses in Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 2. Like Echo again went from a 99 to a 70, but he may have bled. But some of the horses that run early on, like Forte, he got an 89 in his debut back on May 27th. So that's a good speed figure. Normally speed figures on late May, early June are right around 75 to 80. Then he came back in his second lifetime start, ran 4th and picked up an 85. Now Curly Jack got an 86 on June 2nd, picked up an 85 in his second lifetime start. Of course, he ran in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile. Corona Bolt, he got an 86, but he did that last week. So his 86 on November 19th isn't as impressive as the 86 that 489 that Forte got on May 27th. And normally what there is, we're starting to get now to win some of these maiden special weights at the bigger racetracks like Fairgrounds, coming up at the Aqueduct meet. You've got the Santa Anita meet and then Los Al. You're going to start to need a high 80s to lower 90s speed figure to really be competitive to go into those stakes races early on. And so that's a good way to look at some of these horses. So I think Loggins, he had that 99 in his debut. That was a big victory on the Brisnet scale. Echo again with that 99. They're already there. If you're running a 95 to 100 as a 2-year-old in the Brisnet scale, you just need to stay healthy and develop your running style early on as a 3-year-old. All right, Juan, thanks for the compliment and have an enjoyable race day tomorrow. The Clark handicap, hopefully all of your photo finishes are winning ones tomorrow at Churchill Downs. So some other questions, if you have them, make sure to get them in. Then we want to do is look at the Las Vegas odds. Of course, Las Vegas doesn't have any ban on Bob Baffert, so they include all of the horses. They've got about 110 horses at Caesar's Palace right now as part of William Hill. And the favorite is Arabian Night. Of course, he won on Breeders' Cup weekend, 10-1. He is 10-1 for trainer Bob Knight at Las Vegas. Forte, 15-1. Cave Rock, 16-1. Extra Anejo at 18-1. Loggins at 20-1. Brad Cox trained. And then Echo again, another Steve Asmussen horse. Steve Asmussen with 2 of the top 6 favorites at Vegas. Echo again, 22-1. And then Arabian Lion, he lost to Giant Mischief in his second start, but had a fast speed figure in his debut. And of course, Arabian Lion, 25-1. And definitely something to take a look at as you look at for Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 2. Right now, Forte about 11-1 through first day of betting. Extra Anejo right around 12-1, 13-1. Loggins right around 20-1 for Thursday of Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 2. And be interesting to see what Echo again comes back and does. That's another horse that I think we may see in the Springboard Mile, just to kind of get him a win again, get him back on track. That's another racetrack, Remington Park, that Steve Asmussen wins a lot of races at. And he always used to bring horses to Remington Park. For many years was one of the leading trainers at Remington Park. So I wouldn't be surprised to see one of his guns at Remington Park, along with Brad Cox, maybe shipping one in there. So that Remington Park could come up a pretty strong race this year for the Springboard Mile on December 17th. Don't forget, we've got previews up of the Clark Handicap. You can watch that on the channel. We've got the Kentucky Jockey Club. We've got the Goldenrod Stakes. Our weekly speed report comes out on Tuesdays, and we're going to have some more live streams as we start to get back on the race days. We may do one next Friday as a preview for the Cigar Mile, the Remsen, and the Demoiselle, and maybe do one next Friday, talk about the pick 5, get you lined up for that pick 6, talk about the last major grade 1 for older horses, the grade 1 Cigar Mile. So next question, are Kentucky Derby Future Wagers refund if the horse gets scratched? No. Well, if you bet on Frank's Honor, there's no refunds once a horse is scratched. And then if they know a horse is out, they won't allow you to wager on a horse. But if they don't make the gate or they get hurt, then you're out of luck. So yeah, that's one of the bad things about Kentucky Derby Future Wagers. The advantage is that sometimes in this pool, you'll get maybe 80, 90, 100-1 on some of these horses that may end up being, under 15-1 on Derby Day. And some of these exactas are paying $10,000, $15,000 now that they've got 40-1 for 40 horses listed in the Kentucky Derby Future Wager for 3, 4, 5, and 6. Of course, they're going to have a Kentucky Oaks Future Wager, the Kentucky Oaks Kentucky Derby Daily Double, and lots of options to get your bets in. I think adding that extra pool kind of gave it a chance to get some people that can bet before the Breeders' Cup, and then kind of keep it in the spotlight. Then you come back on this weekend, and then we go into January right after the Lecomte Stakes to start getting to Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 3. So if you've got any questions on the Kentucky Jockey Club, what do you think of Curly Jack in that race? Cyclone Mischief goes for Dale Romans. And then also, who's your filly with that big speed figure? She is most likely going to be favored in the Goldenrod. I went with a little bit of an upset in the Goldenrod. I thought maybe a horse might improve in that race. So I think there's some good options there. A nice card Saturday, some nice maiden special weight races, Victory Formation running. We've also got Curly Jack running, Instant Coffee listed in Kentucky Derby Future Wager pool number 2. So he could possibly go down in odds. And then General Jim, he's another son of Into Mischief. Bill Mott trains. He won a race on the turf. I'm not sure we're going to see him in the Remsen, but he could be one, a little bit of a dirt pedigree that won on the turf. I do like some of those horses that move from dirt to turf to dirt on that Derby trail. Sometimes you can get some higher odds. Sometimes as 2-year-olds, the trainers like to run those horses at a distance of ground. And sometimes those turf races are the only races out there that are 2 turns and not as hard on the horses. They can just kind of run with the slower fractions and then do a stretch run to hopefully pick up a victory. So that is a look at Kentucky Derby Future Wager. Remember, support the channel, smash that like button, hit the share button and share it with all your friends. Give thanks, give a few dollars to help pay for the equipment as we continue to move along on the Kentucky Derby Trail 2023. We're going to be getting going again with the Thoroughbred Prospectus, my weekly newsletter. If you want to subscribe to that, look for the channel and then subscribe to that as we get back in the game. And we're going to be profiling weekly on Mondays, rankings, contenders, updates on the maiden special weights, updates on the horses on the way, all the way through the Triple Crown. So that is a look at Kentucky Derby Future Wager Pool number 2. Again, if you have any questions after the show, leave a question and we'll answer that on our next live stream. But happy Thanksgiving to everybody. Thanks for joining me tonight. And our previews are up for the Goldenrod and the Kentucky Jockey Club. Clark is tomorrow. Derby Bandit likes Trademark as a long shot. Juan likes Rich Strike. The Kentucky Derby winner of 2022 running in the Clark Handicap tomorrow, the day after Thanksgiving. That's a good night and a wrap on Kentucky Derby Future Wager Pool number 2.